The people of Earth are different from us, it's true. They won't necessarily make the same mistakes we did. Not if you guide them, Cal. Not if you give them hope.
And if you bring any of them hoes up in here, make sure I fucking first.
I watch so you don't have to.
Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
Come on. Do it. Do it!
When Superman gets drawn into conflicts at home and abroad, his actions are questioned, giving Lex Luthor an opportunity to get the Man of Steel out of the way for good. Will intrepid reporter Lois Lane and Superman's four-legged companion Krypto be able to help him before it's too late? Now, it's been no secret that I, as well as many other people, have been highly critical of this film even before its release. There is this notion that if you were not 100% complimentary of all of the marketing and information that came out about this movie, that you were going into it wanting to hate it. There is also this notion that if you were critical of this film, that you are not open to new interpretations of these iconic characters.
Bullshit.
And that your love of past films under the DC banner is clouding your judgment on this film. Now, I can't speak for everyone who has criticized this film, but as a longtime DC fan, and as a film critic as well, I've been very complimentary of many different interpretations of one of my favorite DC characters. Of course, I'm talking about Batman. The truth is that I've never once been dismissive of any new version of Batman, even when some people were, and that was mostly because I usually had faith in the people involved with giving us that new interpretation. And everyone from Tim Burton all the way down to Matt Reeves never really disappointed me. And that's why I laugh at allegations that because I was highly critical of James Gunn's Superman prior to its release, that somehow means that I hated this idea from the very start. Now listen, from the moment that James Gunn was hired, I was very skeptical that he was the right person for the job. And most of that was based on his past track record of films, and the fact that I've never really been a fan of his work. And to me, his style of filmmaking just didn't mesh well with how I think of DC and the character of Superman. But even so, from the start, knowing all of that, I said that I was willing to give him a chance. But I also said that he couldn't just make just another comic book movie. He needed to do something groundbreaking. And that would involve him needing to step out of his comfort zone and do something with this Superman project that he's never done with any other project before. And I just never had confidence that he was a versatile enough filmmaker to pull that off. And now that I've seen Superman for myself, I'm here to report that a lot of my initial concerns have been validated. And that's not because I saw what I wanted to see, that's simply because the writing was on the wall from the very beginning. The truth is that there are some decent ideas in this movie. The problem is that they are ideas that we've seen before in other Superman movies, and we've seen them executed much better.
Not impressed.
The plot of this film is set in motion by this moral dilemma where Superman involves himself in a foreign conflict. And this causes a lot of people in this universe to ask the question, was it his place to do so? And Superman himself has a somewhat naive outlook and reasoning behind why he got involved. And this is my first major problem with this movie, is that we've covered this ground already in other Superman movies. They're just doing it in a much more straightforward way this time around. And the best way that I can describe the overall plot of this movie is straightforward and lacking any kind of nuance. There are moments like a conversation between Clark and Lois about this situation where the film wants you to be more wrapped up in the conflict than you actually are. The truth is that this movie is dropping you directly in the middle of a story that is already taking place. And there is no real setup for anything that is going on outside of an opening text explanation. In addition to all of that, we are introduced to a Superman and Clark Kent who is very unsure of himself. Again, something that has been covered a lot in Superman movies. The only difference being this time around he lashes out in a way that makes him look like a man-child more than anything else. It's a far cry from the more controlled and stoic version of the character that I think of whenever Superman enters my mind. And because of that, it feels like this movie is trying to rush a character arc into existence without putting the appropriate amount of time into it to make it feel organic. As far as David Corenswet goes, I was very vocal about how I wasn't sold on him in the role of Superman. I thought he would make a decent Clark Kent, but I was not sold on his screen presence when it came to playing the Man of Steel.
No, don't like that.
To the film's credit, I am a little bit more convinced now that David Corenswet could make a great Superman under the right conditions. The problem is that, similar to the rest of the cast in this movie, I think the material is failing them. There are moments throughout this movie, especially towards the end and in some of the fights, where he very much feels like Superman. Then there are other moments where he feels like a caricature or a parody of the character instead. And it got to the point where I started to wonder whether or not James Gunn has any level of admiration for this character at all. Inconsistent is the only way that I can describe it. It's like a hopeful and optimistic version of the character is constantly battling with a more goofy and campy version of the character, and yes, those are two very different things. James Gunn's dialogue sometimes has a tendency to come off a bit clunky and cringe, and that happened on more than one occasion with the character of Superman. Unfortunately, the Clark Kent side of his personality is hardly explored at all, outside of a pretty decent scene with Pa Kent, which is honestly the most heartfelt scene in the movie. The only problem is, for the limited amount of time that Pa Kent and Ma Kent, for that matter, are seen prior to this scene, they are also portrayed as these stereotypical caricatures that come off more like a parody than a legitimate character. As far as the other characters in the film, I thought that Rachel Brosnahan was good as Lois Lane. I actually felt like she had a pretty good amount of chemistry with David, but I also felt like James Gunn did not take advantage of that chemistry and develop their relationship in a much more effective way. Not to mention, Rachel's Lois is pretty much sent on this side mission in the third act of the film that pretty much goes nowhere. So at the end of the day, a great casting did feel like a somewhat wasted opportunity.
Don't waste my motherfucking time!
Nicholas Hoult as Lex was almost inexplicable to me. To me, it felt like Nicholas wasn't sure if he was supposed to be playing this character over the top or straightforward, and because of that, it is a very uneven performance. To be quite honest, I did not find him menacing in the slightest, and he felt like more of a joke. Which, surprise, surprise, again feels like another missed opportunity because Nicholas Hoult is a more than capable actor and would seem perfect for the role of Lex Luthor. And then we have the Justice Gang, who were clearly only included so James Gunn could do his typical quirky group of characters shtick. Guy Gardner is just as goofy as expected, Hawkgirl is underutilized and pretty much has no character to speak of. Mr. Terrific gets the most to do out of these three characters, and to be quite honest, he is probably one of the best parts of the movie. The problem is that with all of these characters, and then you throw in a whole group of villains on top of that, it's just too much going on, and there's just not enough screen time to justify all of these characters being included. It very much feels like James Gunn and WB desperately trying to fast track an established universe into existence, and doing so without putting in the legwork, and because of that, the film does feel overstuffed and messy. From a pure filmmaking perspective, there's not a lot to write home about when it comes to the visuals in this film either. A lot of the visuals feel very muted and uninteresting to me. The shots do have a TV quality to them that limits the scale of the film in a way that a Superman movie can ill afford. Some CGI was decent, like with Crypto, while other shots, like in some of the fight sequences, felt a lot less organic and thus took me out of the film. The editing in this film was also quite strange. In the kaiju scene in particular, there is this one cut that is very awkward and out of place, and it makes it feel like a large chunk of that sequence was basically ripped out of the film.
What the hell am I looking at? When does this happen in the movie?
I did enjoy the score for the film, which I've mentioned before, but I also enjoyed the score before it was reworked from the original John Williams classic. And while it is as effective as it's ever been, it does absolutely nothing, as I predicted, to give this version of Superman his own identity. As far as the humor goes, I will give James Gunn credit for this. I think he scaled back just a little bit on the cringe humor. At the very least, he cut it out after those rumored poor test screenings. At the same time, he could not help himself but to use more comedic moments to undermine the more serious moments in the film in typical MCU fashion. It's become clear to me over the years that some comic book movie directors just do not know how to let these moments breathe in a way to where they will resonate better with the audience, and James Gunn is one of the biggest culprits of that. To have quirky banter about punk rock bands of everything immediately following Superman finding out this massive revelation about himself is jarring cinematically. Speaking of giant revelations, this one happens pretty early in the film, and I'm sure most of you have heard about it already and probably have your opinions on it. And of course I'm talking about a pretty significant revelation in regards to Superman's real father, Jor-El. And I have to say, as a longtime fan of the character, it did feel egregious to me, and like a Taika Waititi, Ryan Johnson type troll job. Subverting your expectations in the worst way possible. Somebody somewhere thought that this was going to be a great idea, and listen, I'm all for taking liberties with the source material. But this one particular change to the lore pretty much went against everything that we know and love about the character of Jor-El and about Superman for that matter. And I do think that it's a risky decision and it's going to turn a lot of fans off when they eventually see it.
I'm having trouble.
The finale of this film features a monologue from Superman himself, and it's basically him talking about the whole he's more human than any of us idea that has been at the core of this character forever. The only problem is that when you have Superman saying it about himself, it does come off as forced and quite frankly out of character. If you had someone else saying it, similar to Commissioner Gordon's monologue at the end of The Dark Knight, that basically explains the essence of the character to us, that might have actually worked. But in this case, it felt like James Gunn telling everyone in the most overt and lazy way possible that this is what this movie is about, in case you didn't get it. And this is another massive problem with this movie. It either has no confidence in the audience to figure out anything for themselves, or again, James Gunn as a writer is not capable of delivering a deep and meaningful message in a much more organic way.
Message!
And this to me is another big takeaway from this movie. To me, it's James Gunn, especially through the character of Lex Luthor, kind of announcing his insecurities about how people view him as a filmmaker contained within the movie. That's where all the internet stuff comes from. That's where all the Army of Monkeys stuff comes from. They have a pocket universe where anyone who ever said anything bad about Lex Luthor is then imprisoned. This whole movie feels like James Gunn desperately trying to respond to his biggest critics and failing miserably at doing so. It also feels like an overcorrection of sorts, possibly initiated by the studio, who clearly wanted to move away from the more serious tone of the Snyderverse. So they basically went in the complete opposite direction and went full-on campy and goofy. And it very much feels like WB and comic book movies in general repeating past mistakes like they did with the Schumacher Batman films in the late 90s. And in effect, that could potentially set the genre back even further than it had already fallen.
All right, everyone, chill.
At the end of the day, Superman is pretty much exactly the type of movie that I thought we would be getting. Let me put it this way, it's not how I would have rebooted the property of DC if I had the opportunity to do so. To me, Superman feels like just another comic book movie in a sea of forgettable comic book movies that are no longer living up to their potential. This, my friends, is the difference between a comic book movie director who is aiming to please a very niche audience and a legitimate film director who is looking to dip his toes into the genre and hopefully elevate the material in a way that we've seen from DC in the past. Superman feels like a step backwards in that aspect from a filmmaking perspective, as well as a cinematic perspective. And to me, the character of Superman and DC as a whole is capable of so much more, and that's why I'm going to give Superman the Angry Rocky.
The dreaded stinks!
Y'all be cool. Right on.